Shalom Aleichem. This is a tribute to Harav Gershon Mendel ben Reb Chaim Meir Garelik, the Rebbe Shaliach to the country of Italy, and to a very genuine chassid. We have lost an icon in Lubavitch, and I'll explain. The Rebbe in 1956 came out with what was called Milchemes Hatnufa, an offensive war. At that time was the Sinai War in Eretz Yisrael, and the Rebbe used the opportunity to motivate his Hasidim to not just be on the defensive, but go on the offensive. I heard this from Reb Shmuel Blazinski, who was working in Tzach in Eretz Yisrael. This is when the Rebbe founded Tzach in Eretz Yisrael, and Tzach in America was founded a little while before that. And the idea was not to wait for the person to come to you, but to go to them. So in Eretz Yisrael, they went to the kibbutzim, and they spoke, and they danced, and they shared Chassidus. Chabad Lubavitch went out into the field. And the same was here in America. And at the time, it was unpopular, unconventional to do this, even in the world of Lubavitch. And in 1958, shortly after this movement started, the Rebbe announced the idea of Ufaratsta, to disseminate. Ufaratsta Yom HaVakedma V'Tzafoyna V'Nedban. He took the niggin that Rabbi Martin brought from Eretz Yisrael, and he made of it Ufaratsta, gewaldige niggin. And who was from the first, or maybe the first, of the Rebbe Shluchim that he sent was Reb Gershon Mendel. Now let me explain a little bit the background to who he was at the time. There's many clips going around in Baruch Hashem. I want to go back a little bit to give you a picture. I heard this from Rabbi Raskin, the Shaliach in Vermont, who told me, everyone knows that his father, Reb Levik and Reb Gershon Mendel, were best friends. Trein rein de leimes parshin. The Zohar HaKadosh says it's like Chochmah and Bina. They're inseparable. Well, my father, who learned in Lud, and he was from the younger Talmidim, I remember growing up as a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old boy, hearing at my father's Shabbos table, nigunim that Reb Shlomo Chaim the Mashpia would teach them in the yeshiva. And I always heard about two bacharim that he would speak about, Reb Gershon Mendel, and Leibel Raskin. And and he said, that he would see them, how they would walk in the Pardes. The yeshiva in Lud, before moved to Kfar Chabad, was in the Pardes. There were buildings with vineyards and greenery. And he would see how they would walk from building to building to go daven barichas, to daven ba'avoda, to daven with great kavanah and intent. And he said it left such an impression on him as a boy who came from a home of a Vizhnitz Chassidim into Lubavitch in 1950 when he was 13 years old. And then he meets them, and he told me how Reb Leibel Raskin reached out to him as he was growing, and Reb Gershon Mendel, and he really looked at them as heroes, his heroes in the yeshiva. Of course, not to forget Rabbi Yisrael Friedman, who we always spoke about as well. Anyway, so these two were so together. They came from Russia, and in fact, they were together from 1943 in Alma Ata, together with the Rebbe's father, and that's why the Raskin family and the Garelik family have a special affinity, have a special affinity with the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, because and Rebbetzin Chana, because of Reb Levik. There's more history there, but we'll just leave it at that for now. So they knew each other, these two boys, from 1943 for 60 years. Because in 2003, when Reb Levik became ill, Reb Gershon Mendel came for Shabbos to the hospital and stayed with him, and they reviewed 60 years of them being brothers. In Yiddish we say Bruderschaft, Anash. What does Anash mean? Good old fashioned Bruderschaft, brotherly love. And this is what these two had. But Reb Gershon Mendel was the first to go out on Shlichus. I saw one of the clips that they had online where he says in an interview, in those days to go away from the Rebbe was like jumping off a 10-story building. And that's what he said, but to explain it a little bit. Where they came from was a place that was eingesapt and totally immersed in Chassidus and Chassidishkeit, right? But the Chassidishkeit of the time was davening ba'avodah, davening ba'riches, Yireh Shemayim, Kabbalah soil. Where did this passion and burn this passion to go away, far away, leave your family and friends and community when people were laughing at you? Where did it begin? So it began actually in Eretz Yisrael when they were in yeshiva with not Reb Shlomo Chaim. They got their davening bariches for Reb Shlomo Chaim. But two other individuals, Reb Avraham Mayor, who was also a mashgiach in the yeshiva at the time in 1950, 51, 52, 53, those years, and Reb Avram Paris. They both instilled in these chevra the idea of the Rebbe. Because at the time, it was a very tumultuous time when in the beginning we didn't know who would be the Rebbe, 1950, 51, the Rashag or the Rebbe, and then even when it was established the Rebbe should be Rebbe, no, fine. But there's a system, there's an order. You have to remember those days there were no tapes and no videos, no one heard my father, the Rebbe's voice. My father remembers the first time that he heard the Rebbe's voice, the Bacharim, the yeshiva, it was like a yom tov for them. And Rabbi Raskin told me that Reb Shlomo Chaim, when he got the first mimer that was mugad by the Rebbe, he came into the Beis Medrash in Zal during the day, and he said, "Megate Fabrengen," and he started Fabrengen middle of the day. I used to say the Nigla with learning Gemara, Talmud, but the Rebbe's first mimer. So there was this fascination. And interesting that Reb Avraham Mayor was the one who instilled in them during the time when they were learning by Reb Shlomo Chaim the hiskashrus, the connection to Rebbe. Then when they came to America, Reb Ben Shem Tov was here, he came on visits from England, etc. He took that to another level. And between these two or three individuals and themselves living in Crown Heights in 770, not living in Crown, living in 770 with the Rebbe those years, the 50 to 60 was Bizgalus, the Fabrengens, the crying, the dancing, the singing, the conversations with Chassidim during the breaks by the Sichas, by the Fabrengens. All of this led to a tremendous love to your father, the Rebbe, our father. The Olam, the Balabatim, including many of the Russians who came, they said, "We just survived the war. Let us rest. Let us breathe." And the Rebbe comes along in 1958 and he says, "No, we need to go out." People couldn't believe that they would be successful. And Reb Gershon Mendel said it himself, and Reb Shlomo Kunya said it in one of the clips, that the antagonism of our own people was palpable. They were laughing at him, at Gershon Mendel, and then later Kunin says how, you'll come back in a month from now. So when I say that Gershon Mendel was an icon, and it's kind of the end of this era, this icon, this is what I'm referring to. That he and his wife, as Rebbetzin soll sie sein gesund, and only have simchas the rest of her life, or together with the entire mishpacha, epitomized the idea of Rebbe and Mesiras Nefesh. And they go hand in hand. Until then, there was Mesiras Nefesh in Rusland, in Russia. No question about it. Rabbi Avraham would say that a chosid was lässt sich nicht schechten beim Hals. A chosid that doesn't allow himself to be slaughtered at the neck is nicht kein chosid. That was the Mesiras Nefesh of the Russische Yidden, which we have no understanding or perception what this means in reality, right? That same Mesiras Nefesh was transformed by Reb Gershon Mendel and Reb Levik and those chevre in those years to shlichus, to going out, wherever the Rebbe sends you. If you'll pay attention and read carefully the sichas and listen to those farbringens on tape and some today on video, you'll hear that the Rebbe spoke more about Reb Gershon Mendel and even his Rebbetzin than anyone else on shlichus. It's a fact. It's not something you can record how many times. The famous Sikha Yud Beis Thomas Tovshin Yutes, where the Rebbe says, now that's Skefen Gan Yisrael in Milano. You know that there's a new Gan Yisrael in Milano, Italy. And Harav Gershon Mendel, and the Rebbe coined him Harav. You know, he was a mashpia, you know, in the 50s, in the 57, 58, I'm not sure which year exactly. Reb Shlomo Kunya tells over how he was his mashpia, and he was so endearing and so intelligent, and so he had humor and he had seichel, common sense, and he was makar of the Bucher. I mean, you see how Kunin, who's 80 years old, speaks about his mashpia from 57, and he breaks down. It's not just he's breaking down because he has to. It's in his guts what Reb Gershon Mendel did for him when he was 17, 18 years old. And he could have gone, he was an American boy, a Bronx boy, right? He could have gone with the Yankees and Babe Ruth and everything else. Well, Ruth was dead by then. But anyway, the Nakuda is that Reb Gershon Mendel gave into him and these Americans a feeling for Rebbe. And this is something we have to realize, that although this icon is gone, the legacy and the poel mamish, the actuality continues. Because today, it's a davar aposhet by all shluchim, Mesiras Nefesh. And when wherever the Rebbe sends you, you go, right? But at that time, it wasn't. It was on the contrary, the current, he was going against the current. And this is why I believe that Rebbe pointed him out at his Rebbetzin more than anyone else, is because they were the first to break the ice. And the lesson for us is so important, that this is the Dir HaShvi generation. The Dir HaShvi, the Rebbe's generation, is going by Mesiras Nefesh to wherever the Shaliach, the Rebbe, sends you, without questions, without debates. Another important thing that I didn't hear people focus on is that he was one of the founders, I don't know if the founder, of the whole idea of building 770s. Now, on one hand, you could kind of, what kind of mishagas is that? But the Rebbe sanctioned it. The Rebbe spoke about 770 Gematria Forats and different things over the years. Gershon Mendel had not just a liking, but a passion. His Chassidischkeit, his Rebbishkeit came as expressed in such things. And here too, I want to explain for a minute or so, that to learn Chassidus, to daven ba'avodah, to have Kabbalah Soil, Shmiras Azmanim, and all that, that's standard 101 in Lubavitch Chassidus. But these ideas of taking, and making sure that you have a 770 where you live, understandably through funding and fundraising and getting the community involved, he planted this idea in the average chassid. And this is something that that continues today. So, for example, now in Baltimore, the yeshiva there, which is a Gavaldi yeshiva, is putting up a 770. He was among those that planted the idea that we see now 30, 40 years later. One of the other things that stands out about his life is his charm and the way he carried himself. There was someone that he and his wife were Makarev, Professor Avraham Foxbrunner. He was known as Roman Foxbrunner. He wrote a book called Chabad on the Alter Rebbe. It's a fascinating book. He was probably a genius. So I was told, and he was in the late 60s, he was in 770. And he came from Gershon Mendel. So Chevra told me that they saw the way he davened and carried himself just like Gershon Mendel and just like the Rebbe. The mannerisms, the way he stood and the way he sat and the facial expressions. They said, that they heard that he was emulating Gershon Mendel. And who was that Gershon Mendel emulating? The Rebbe. We don't know the impact of a chassid. We don't know. But when you live like a chassid, and you live like the Rebbe's a chassid, and the Dir HaShvi chassid, and you have Mesiras Nefesh, and you go against the current, your own parents and grandparents and Babbas and Zaydas and friends who tell you, stay here. Why do you have to go far away? You can go here on Shlichus. Wherever the Rebbe sends me. To China's China, Tunisia, Milano, Italy, fine. By the way, what happened was that the Rav of the Old Yaakov Shul in Milano, where Gershon Mendel was Rav, there was a Lubavitcher, Mordechai Perlov, who was a Tom, they called the Mordechai Gershon from Gershon. So the Mordechai Perlov, the Perlov family, which is Lubavitch, that was their Zayda, Elter Zayda. He was the Rav in that shul. And in 58, he left with the Rishus of the Rebbe to his son. He had an only son, David, in Melbourne, Australia. So they needed a Rav. So the Rebbe suggested to Reb Chadakov to choose Gershon Mendel. He himself decided that would be a position. And the Rebbe turned him into a Rav. That was the word of 770 was, here is a Chassidish Bacher. Here is a mashpia. Here is someone who's into chassidus and davening and bringing a Rebbe. And the Rebbe says, you become a Rav. You paskin shailas. You give kashas achshedim. And, the Chevra took it in a way like, wow, the Rebbe the Rebbe tim gemacht za Rav. And the Rebbe makes someone into a Rav. He is the emissary Rav. Because the Rebbe tim gemacht. One last point. There's so much to say, but we have to keep it short. He was buried in Har HaZeisim. When I heard that, I said, wow, passed away here, and he's not being buried in New York by the Rebbe. I don't know the details. I'm sure it'll come out, or it doesn't come out. It's not our business, really. But I read that his father, Reb Chaim Meir, in the 30s, I believe, wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael with his family. So the Frierdiker Rebbe told him, ask your wife. He asked his wife, she says,